Hi, my friends. How are you? I want to read you a story about Jesus's last days. And we here in the Catholic Church, we call that Holy Week. So Holy Week starts on Palm Sunday and it goes until Holy Saturday, which is the day before Easter. So I want to read you a story about Jesus's life during that time. So the name of the story is Love One Another, the Last Days of Jesus. Once there lived a man named Jesus. Jesus was a teacher. He was wise and good, kind to the poor, the sick, and the outcast. He traveled the countryside and spoke to all of God's love and forgiveness. Jesus taught, love your neighbor, both friend and enemy, for in heaven all are loved. Forgive those who wrong you, and you too will be forgiven. Trust in God and love one another. So this right here is Jesus teaching to the people. Many who gathered to listen were filled with hope and comfort. And Jesus taught, quote, God is always near. Heaven is all around us, even now. We have only to look for it, end quote. So some who heard Jesus' teachings wanted to be with him always, to learn his ways and his wisdom. They left all that they had and became his disciples. They did not always understand what Jesus taught, but they loved him and he loved them. One day, Jesus led his disciples to the great city of Jerusalem. When he entered the gates of the city, people cheered as if he were a king. Okay, and this is what we call Palm Sunday. And you see there's a little donkey right there and Jesus, and they're all walking through the city and people are happy and applauding him. Jesus went to the holy temple and began to teach. And again, he spoke of love. A man asked, which of all teachings is the greatest? And Jesus answered, love God and love one another. These teachings together are the greatest. Crowds drew near to hear, and Jesus' simple but powerful words was what they listened to. The temple priests grew angry with him, and they grew envious. Does he think he is wiser than we are? They grumbled to one another. Does he think he is the new king? All week, as Jesus taught in the temples, the priests plotted how to arrest him. So here he is teaching about love, and here they are getting angry and being jealous because Jesus had a lot of followers and a lot of people believing in him, and these men were mad. So they wanted to figure out, how can we get him arrested and get him out of here? One evening, Jesus gathered his disciples for a meal away from the crowds. This is what we call Holy Thursday. And he says, I have wanted to be with you one last time, Jesus said. For soon I fear one of you will betray me. The disciples were saddened and alarmed, and they asked each other, do you mean me? And they wondered which of them could possibly betray the teacher that they loved so very much. They did not know that for only 30 silver coins, the disciple named Judas had agreed to help the priest arrest Jesus. So here's a picture of the Last Supper. And then you see this here with the bag of coins. This is Judas. And these are the disciples sitting around the Last Supper where Jesus is breaking the bread. Okay, and this is what becomes our sacrament of the Eucharist. Later, Jesus and the disciples went together to a garden, and only Judas did not follow them because he was going to turn them in. Jesus was deeply grieved and troubled. He knew that something terrible would soon happen. He asked his disciples to keep watch while he prayed. The disciples wanted to do as Jesus asked, but they were weary and could not stay awake. Full of sorrow, Jesus prayed alone. Whatever may come, let God's will be done. So you see Jesus there? And these are his disciples napping, falling asleep. And instead of watching over, they fell asleep. Jesus woke the disciples where they lay. Could you not keep watch for even 1 hour? He said sadly. Rise, for the one who will betray me is here. Who's that? Judas. Just then, Judas entered the garden, leading a band of soldiers sent by the priest. Judas called to Jesus, Teacher, and he kissed him hello. Jesus whispered, Friend, do what you have come to do. Then the soldiers took hold of Jesus, for the kiss had been a sign to seize him. The soldiers led Jesus away, but the disciples did not follow. They were afraid they too would be captured, and they deserted Jesus and they fled. Disciples fleeing. That night, the temple priests gathered to judge their prisoner Jesus. They questioned him and they mocked him and asking, Do you not call yourself a king? Jesus answered only, You say that I do. For he knew the priests had already judged against him. The priests grew even angrier, and they declared that Jesus has broken the holy laws and should be punished with death. At dawn, they brought Jesus to Pilate, the Roman ruler of the land. And Pilate too questioned Jesus. Are you then a new king? Jesus only answered, So you are saying. Pilate could find no proof that Jesus had done wrong, but the priests had stirred up the crowd outside. Put him to death! Crucify him! They cried. But Pilate feared the angry crowd. He let the soldiers take Jesus away. The soldiers brought Jesus to a hill outside the city called Golgotha, and they put him on a cross. You see the women here are weeping. Jesus uttered a final prayer. And then Jesus died. And this is how we celebrate Good Friday, when Jesus died on the cross. A man who loved Jesus took his body and carefully placed it in a tomb. He rolled a large stone in front of the opening with the help of many men. And then he left to mourn the death of Jesus. Two days later, another friend of Jesus, whose name was Mary, came to the tomb. The large stone had been rolled away. Mary looked inside the dark opening, and the tomb was empty. But Mary began to cry. She was afraid that someone had taken Jesus' body. And then she saw a man close by. She heard him ask, "Why are you crying?" And she answered, "Someone has taken our dear teacher away. Can you tell me where?" And then she heard the man call her by name, "Mary." Suddenly she knew him. It was Jesus she saw before her. She heard him say, "Go, tell the others what you have seen." So Mary thought Jesus was dead and someone stole his body, but the man was Jesus, and she recognized him when he called her by name. And Jesus said, "Go tell the others, look, I've risen." Mary found the disciples where they had gathered in hiding. "Jesus lives!" she exclaimed. But the disciples did not believe her. They were deep in mourning and weeping with regret and remorse and with great grief and sorrow. for they knew they had deserted Jesus, and then he had died. Suddenly, they saw Jesus was there among them. The disciples were startled and they were afraid. "Do not be troubled," they heard Jesus say. "Be at peace and know that I am with you always." Then the disciples rejoiced. Their grief was ended, for Jesus had died, and yet he lived. "Go now," they heard Jesus say. "Teach others as I have taught you. Forgive and love as I have loved and forgiven you. So you must love one another." The disciples were filled with great peace and happiness, for now they understood in their hearts what Jesus had taught. They knew their wrongs were forgiven and that love was greater than hate, even greater than death. In his love, Jesus was able to live on. Joyous, the disciples set out to bring Jesus' teachings to everyone, everywhere, to tell the wondrous story of this day, the Easter day, to all of the world. Jesus has risen. Okay, so Holy Thursday was when Jesus had the Last Supper with his disciples. He washed their feet and he brought us the Eucharist. Good Friday at 3 o'clock is when Jesus died on the cross and was laid in the tomb. And then Holy Saturday is when we prepare ourselves for the great big feast of Easter, which happens on Easter Sunday, when Jesus breaks through death and rises so that we can live forever with him in heaven. So that's the story of Holy Week in our Catholic tradition. Until I see you again, bye.